The millionaire cruelly humiliated the nurse in front of the entire hospital. A minute later, he fainted because of what she said. The hallway of St. Gabriel's Hospital buzzed with frenzied activity. Doctors and nurses moved back and forth with the precision of a Swiss watch, while patients or families anxiously awaited news of their loved ones. Amidst this organized chaos, a tall, well-dressed man made his way with determination. His name was Jack Morrison, and desperation was reflected in every line of his face. Jack stopped in front of the intensive care unit desk, his knuckles white from clenching his fists. "I need to see my son, Matthew Morrison," he demanded, his voice tense with worry and exhaustion. The nurse behind the desk, a middle-aged woman with a compassionate but firm expression, shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but visits are restricted at this time. The doctor will come to speak with you as soon as possible." Jack felt anger bubbling up inside him. How dare they deny him access to his own son? He, who had built a business empire with his own hands, who was accustomed to doors opening at his approach, now found himself powerless in the face of a simple hospital rule. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he growled, leaning over the desk. "I'm Jack Morrison. I can buy and sell this hospital 10 times over if I want. I demand to see my son right now." The nurse, Amy Sanders, remained calm despite Jack's intimidating presence. She had dealt with distressed family members before, but there was something about this man's arrogance that deeply irritated her. "Mr. Morrison," she responded in a calm but firm voice, "I understand your concern, but the rules are in place to protect the patients. Your son is receiving the best possible care. I assure you that—" "Don't assure me of anything," Jack interrupted, slamming his palm on the desk. "You have no idea what I'm going through. My son is dying, and you're denying me the right to be with him. What kind of monsters are you?" Amy felt her heart constrict at those words. She knew exactly what it was like to lose a child. The image of her little Alex, who had passed away years ago under similar circumstances, flashed through her mind like a painful lightning bolt. However, she remained professional. "Mr. Morrison, please lower your voice. This is a hospital, and there are other patients who need to rest." Jack looked at her with contempt. "How dare you tell me what to do? You're just a nurse. You have no idea what real suffering is. You probably don't even have children." Those words hit Amy like a slap. For a moment, she felt her professional mask cracking, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Mr. Morrison, I ask you to calm down or I'll have to call security." "Security?" Jack scoffed. "You think I'm afraid of some underpaid guards? I'm warning you, nurse, if you don't let me see my son right now, I'll make sure you never work in a hospital again. I'll make your life a living hell." Amy felt her own anger beginning to boil. How dare this man threaten her when she was only doing her job? However, years of experience had taught her to stay calm in crisis situations. "Your threats won't change the hospital rules, Mr. Morrison," she said firmly. "I suggest you wait for the doctor in the waiting room. I promise we'll keep you informed about your son's condition." Jack glared at her, his eyes burning with fury. For a moment it seemed he was going to explode again, but then, as if he had remembered something, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he growled before walking away towards the waiting room. Amy watched him leave, her heart pounding. She knew this confrontation was just the beginning. Jack Morrison didn't seem like a man accustomed to accepting no for an answer, and she sensed that the coming days would be a constant battle. Meanwhile, in the intensive care unit, young Matthew Morrison fought for his life, oblivious to the drama unfolding outside his doors. The monitors emitted a constant beep, measuring each beat of his heart, each assisted breath. And in the midst of that silence interrupted only by the sound of machines, a rookie nurse was making a mistake that would soon unleash an even greater storm. The following morning dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself reflected the anguish being experienced inside St. Gabriel's Hospital. Jack Morrison hadn't slept all night, his bloodshot eyes staring fixedly through the waiting room window, watching as raindrops hit the glass in an incessant rhythm. Dr. Benjamin Hayes, head of the intensive care unit, approached Jack with a hesitant step. His face showed a mixture of concern and guilt that immediately made Jack's heart race. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Hayes began, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the waiting room. "I need to talk to you about Matthew's condition." Jack jumped to his feet, his body as tense as a violin string. "What's happening, Doctor? Has there been any change?" Dr. Hayes took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm afraid there's been a complication. Last night, during the shift change, a mistake was made in administering Matthew's medications." The world seemed to stop for Jack. The doctor's words echoed in his ears like a distant echo. "A mistake," he repeated, incredulous. "What kind of mistake?" "A nurse in training confused the dosage of one of the medications," explained Dr. Hayes, his voice heavy with regret. "Fortunately, we realized it in time and were able to correct it, but this has further complicated Matthew's condition." The anger that Jack had been containing since the night before exploded like a volcano. "How is this possible?" he roared, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "This is supposed to be one of the best hospitals in the country, and you're telling me you almost killed my son because of a rookie mistake." Dr. Hayes tried to calm Jack, but it was like trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your frustration. I assure you we'll take all necessary measures." "Your assurances mean nothing to me," Jack interrupted. "I want to see my son right now, and I want that incompetent nurse fired immediately." At that moment, Amy, who had been observing the scene from afar, decided to intervene. She approached with a firm step, her face a mask of professional determination. "Mr. Morrison," she said, positioning herself next to Dr. Hayes, "I understand you're upset, but shouting isn't going to help Matthew. We need you to calm down so we can explain the situation and the options we have." Jack turned to her, his eyes burning with fury. "You again? Haven't you done enough damage already? Or were you the one who almost killed my son?" Amy felt as if she had been slapped, but she maintained her composure. "No, Mr. Morrison. I wasn't on duty last night. But as the head nurse of the ICU, it's my responsibility to handle this situation." "Your responsibility," Jack scoffed. "Your responsibility was to make sure this didn't happen in the first place. How can I trust that my son is in good hands when you allow incompetent rookies to care for him?" Dr. Hayes tried to intercede. "Mr. Morrison, please, I understand your anger, but I assure you we're doing everything possible for Matthew. In fact, there's a surgery that could—" But Jack wasn't listening anymore. His gaze was fixed on Amy, as if she personified everything that was wrong with this hospital. "You," he said, pointing an accusing finger at her. "You're responsible for this. I swear I'll make sure you lose your licenses. I'll sue this hospital until there's not a brick left standing." Amy, despite the threat, stood firm. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your pain and frustration, but I assure you that everyone here is dedicated to saving your son's life. The mistake was serious, yes, but we've taken measures to correct it and prevent it from happening again." Jack moved closer to her, his face inches from Amy's. "You have no idea what pain is," he hissed. "You have no idea what it's like to see your child fighting for his life, while you, supposed professionals, make stupid mistakes." For a moment, something changed in Amy's eyes. A flash of pain, so deep and raw that even Jack noticed. But before he could say anything more, Dr. Hayes intervened. "Mr. Morrison, please, we need to discuss the options for Matthew. There's a surgery that could save his life. But it's high risk." These words finally penetrated Jack's cloud of anger. "A surgery? What kind of surgery?" Dr. Hayes looked at Amy, who nodded slightly, before continuing. "It's an experimental procedure. It could save Matthew's life, but it also carries significant risks. We need your consent to proceed." Jack collapsed into a nearby chair, all his anger suddenly transforming into fear. "Risks? What kind of risks?" As Dr. Hayes began to explain the details of the surgery, Amy observed Jack. She saw how the arrogant and threatening man crumbled, revealing a scared and desperate father. For a moment, she felt a pang of compassion. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, approaching him, "I know it's difficult, but we need you to focus now. Matthew needs you to be strong and focused." Jack looked at her, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, only fear and desperation. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Amy put a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort that surprised them both. We're going to do everything possible for Matthew, but we need you to trust us. As Jack nodded slowly, processing the information about the surgery, Amy felt something change between them. The wall of hostility was beginning to crack, revealing a shared vulnerability. I have to go, he said quickly before running towards the ICU. Jack stood up too, panic visible in every line of his face. What's happening? Is it Matthew? Amy, who was already moving towards the unit, paused for a moment. Mr. Morrison, please stay here. We'll inform you as soon as we know something. But Jack wasn't willing to stay on the sidelines. With surprising speed for a businessman, he launched himself after Amy and Dr. Hayes, ignoring the staff's protests. In the ICU, the controlled chaos of a medical emergency was in full swing. Doctors and nurses moved with choreographed precision around Matthew's bed, whose small body was shaking with convulsions. Jack, who had managed to slip in behind Amy, froze at the door, his face a mask of horror as he saw his son in that state. Matthew, he cried, trying to get closer, but Amy firmly stopped him. Mr. Morrison, you can't be here, she said, her voice firm but understanding. Please, let the team do their job. Dr. Hayes, in the midst of the action, was shouting orders. We need to stabilize him now. Prepare the operating room. Jack looked at Amy, panic evident in his eyes. Operating room, are you going to operate on him now? Amy nodded gravely. The surgery we talked about. It seems we have no other choice. It's risky, but if we don't do it... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jack understood the gravity of the situation. For a moment, all his arrogance, all his anger vanished, replaced by pure, raw fear. What should I do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amy looked into his eyes, seeing for the first time the vulnerable man behind the facade of power. You have to make a decision, Mr. Morrison. Now. Time seemed to have stopped as Jack struggled internally. All his money, all his power, meant nothing at this moment. His son's life was hanging by a thread, and he had to decide whether to risk it all on a dangerous surgery or lose him without trying. Do it, he finally said, his voice broken. Save my son. With those words, a new wave of activity was unleashed. They prepared Matthew for surgery, while Dr. Hayes gave quick instructions to his team. Amy guided Jack out of the ICU to a small private room. The surgery will last several hours, she explained softly. I'll keep you informed of any developments. Jack collapsed into a chair, all his energy drained. He looked at Amy, and for the first time since he arrived at the hospital, there was no hostility in his gaze. Thank you, he murmured. Amy nodded, surprised by the change in his attitude. She was about to leave when Jack spoke again. You said before that you understood. How can you understand this? He asked, his voice mixed with curiosity and desperation. Amy paused, her hand on the doorknob. For a moment, she considered maintaining her professional distance, but something in Jack's vulnerability moved her. Because I lost a child too, she said softly, turning to him. 5 years ago. His name was Alex. Jack looked at her, surprised. I didn't know, I'm sorry. Amy nodded, accepting his words. That's why I'm here, Mr. Morrison. To make sure no other parent has to go through what I went through. With those words, she left the room, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. The once powerful businessman suddenly found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about the nurse he had threatened and insulted. Meanwhile, in the operating room, Dr. Hayes and his team were fighting against time to save Matthew's life. The surgery was complex and risky. Each movement could mean the difference between life and death. The hours passed slowly. Jack alternated between periods of anxious waiting and moments of deep reflection. He thought about his son, about how he had been so busy building his empire that he often forgot to spend time with him. He thought about Amy, about how he had judged her so harshly without knowing her story. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the door opened. Amy entered. "Said, thank you," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. Thank you for everything." Amy, surprised by the gesture, patted him on the back before gently pulling away. "We're just doing our job, Mr. Morrison." Jack looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "No, it's more than that. I've been an idiot. I'm sorry." Amy looked at him for a moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I accept your apology," she finally said. "Now, so do you want to see your son?" Jack nodded fervently, and together they headed towards the ICU. As they walked, Jack realized that something had changed, not only in his relationship with Amy, but in himself. The experience of almost losing his son had shown him what really mattered in life. As they entered the room where Matthew rested, surrounded by machines but alive, Jack felt he was on the verge of a great transformation. A transformation that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The following days were an emotional roller coaster for Jack Morrison. He spent every moment he could beside Matthew's bed in the ICU, anxiously watching every small change on the monitors, every movement of his son. Dr. Hayes and his team came in and out regularly, adjusting medications and performing tests, always with Amy closely supervising every step. It was during one of these routine visits that Jack, exhausted and emotionally drained, finally broke down. "I can't lose him," he murmured, more to himself than to others in the room. "He's all I have." Amy, who was checking Matthew's vital signs, paused and looked at Jack with a mixture of compassion and curiosity. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, "Matthew is progressing well. You need to stay strong for him." Jack looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep and unshed tears. "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "How can you be here day after day watching children fight for their lives? How do you bear it after what you went through?" Amy visibly tensed at the question, but then her shoulders relaxed with a sigh. She sat in a chair next to Jack, maintaining a professional but close distance. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Every child I see here, in a way, reminds me of Alex. But that also gives me strength, because I know how important what we do here is." Jack looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since he arrived at the hospital. He saw the lines of fatigue on her face, but also the determination in her eyes. "Tell me about him," he asked softly. "About Alex." Amy hesitated for a moment, but something in Jack's genuine curiosity convinced her. "Alex was 6 when he got sick," she began, her voice soft but steady. "He was a bright boy, always smiling, always curious. He loved dinosaurs and dreamed of being a paleontologist." As she spoke, Jack noticed how her eyes lit up when remembering her son, despite the evident pain in her voice. "When he was diagnosed with leukemia, our world fell apart," Amy continued. "We spent months in the hospital, fighting with everything we had. But in the end..." Her voice broke slightly, and Jack, in a gesture that surprised them both, took her hand in support. "I'm so sorry," he said sincerely. I can't imagine your pain." Amy gave him a small, grateful smile. "After losing Alex, I thought I could never set foot in a hospital again. But then I realized I could use my experience to help other parents, other children. It's my way of keeping Alex's memory alive." Jack nodded, feeling a new wave of respect for the woman he had threatened and insulted days before. "You're very brave," he said softly. Amy shook her head. "It's not bravery, Mr. Morrison, it's love, the same love you feel for Matthew." Those words hit Jack hard. Suddenly, he found himself talking, the words coming out in a torrent he couldn't contain. "I've been a terrible father," he confessed, tears finally falling down his cheeks. "I was always so busy with work, with making more money, with expanding the business. I thought that was what was important, that I was giving Matthew a good life that way. But now..." He paused, looking at his son's pale but peaceful sleeping face. "Now I realize I've wasted so much time," he continued. "So many moments I could have spent with him, so many things I could have taught him, and now I could lose him without having had the chance to really be his father." Amy listened in silence, allowing Jack to unburden himself. When he finally calmed down, she spoke softly. "It's not too late, Mr. Morrison," she said. "Matthew is fighting, And when he wakes up, you'll have the chance to be the father you want to be." Jack looked at her, a spark of hope in his eyes. "Do you really think he'll wake up?" Amy nodded firmly. "I believe in Matthew, and I believe in the team caring for him. Now I need you to believe too." At that moment, as if he had heard their words, Matthew moved slightly in the bed. It was just a flutter of his eyelids. But for Jack and Amy, it was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. "Matthew!" Jack exclaimed, leaning over the bed. "Son?" Amy was already in action, checking the monitors and calling for Dr. Hayes. "This is a good sign, Mr. Morrison," she said with a smile. "Matthew is fighting to come back to us." As Dr. Hayes rushed into the room, Jack stood by his son's bed, holding his small hand. In his mind, he made a silent promise. If Matthew recovered, he would be the father his son deserved. No more long hours at the office, no more business trips that kept him away for weeks. He would be there for Matthew, for every soccer game, every school play, every important moment, and every ordinary day. And as he watched Amy and Dr. Hayes work efficiently around Matthew, Jack also realized that he had much to learn about true strength and true value. Perhaps, he thought, this wasn't the end of a nightmare, but the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a chapter where money and power would no longer be the most important things, but love, compassion, and gratitude. With that resolution in his heart, Jack Morrison prepared himself for the long road ahead, determined to be not just a better father, but also a better person. The ICU room was immersed in an expectant silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the machines monitoring Matthew's vital signs. Jack Morrison, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and several days' stubble, remained seated next to his son's bed, holding his small hand in his own. Amy, who had just entered for her morning shift, observed the scene from the door with a mixture of compassion and hope. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," she said softly, approaching. "Any changes during the night?" Jack looked up, his tired eyes alert. I think he moved his fingers a while ago," he responded, his voice hoarse from fatigue and contained emotion. "That's good, right?" Amy smiled as she began to check the monitors and IV drip. "It's a very good sign. It means Matthew is fighting to come back to us." As Amy performed her routine checks, Jack watched her with a new appreciation. He no longer saw the stubborn nurse who had denied him access to his son days ago, but a dedicated and compassionate professional who had been there in his darkest moments. "Hi, Amy," he said suddenly, surprising her with the use of her first name. "I want to thank you for everything, not just for taking care of Matthew, but for putting up with me too." Amy paused in the middle of her task, surprised by the sincerity in Jack's voice. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Morrison. It's my job." "No," Jack insisted, shaking his head. "It goes beyond your job, the way you've helped me keep hope. How you've been patient with me even when I've been a complete jerk. That's not just a job, it's a calling." Amy felt a lump forming in her throat. She wasn't used to receiving this kind of recognition, especially from someone who had started as an adversary. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," she said softly. "It means a lot to hear that." Just at that moment, a slight movement on the bed caught both their attention. Matthew's eyelids fluttered, and his fingers moved in his father's hand. "Matthew!" Jack exclaimed, leaning over the bed. "Son, can you hear me?" Amy was already in action, checking the monitors and pressing the button to call Dr. Hayes. "Talk to him, Mr. Morrison," she instructed. "Your voice can help him orient himself." Jack nodded, his voice trembling with emotion as he spoke. "Matthew, it's Dad. I'm here with you. You're safe, son. Please, open your eyes." As if responding to his father's plea, Matthew's eyes began to open slowly. At first, his gaze was unfocused, but little by little it centered on Jack's face. Dad?" he murmured weakly. Jack let out a sob of relief and joy. "Yes, son. It's me. I'm here." Dr. Hayes rushed into the room, followed by a team of nurses. "Excellent," he said, smiling to see Matthew awake. "We're going to do some quick exams, okay?" As the medical team worked, Jack stepped aside, allowing them space but not taking his eyes off his son. Amy approached him, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "He did it," she said softly. "Matthew is a fighter." Jack nodded, tears flowing freely down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not letting me lose hope." After a few minutes that seemed like hours, Dr. Hayes approached Jack with a smile. "Mr. Morrison, I'm pleased to inform you that Matthew is responding very well. His vital signs are stable and he's oriented. He still has a long road ahead, but this is a big step in his recovery." Jack felt like a huge weight was lifting from his shoulders. "Can I be with him?" "Of course," Dr. Hayes responded, "but remember, he needs to rest. Try not to tire him out." Jack nodded and approached Matthew's bed. His son looked at him with tired but recognition-filled eyes. "Dad," Matthew said weakly, "did you stay the whole time?" Jack felt his heart tighten at the question. "Yes, son, and I'll stay as long as you need me. I promise." Matthew smiled slightly before his eyes began to close again. "I love you, Dad," he murmured before falling asleep. "I love you too, son," Jack responded, gently kissing Matthew's forehead. "More than I ever imagined possible." When he turned, he saw Amy observing the scene with an emotional smile. "It's beautiful to see you like this," she said softly. Jack nodded, feeling overwhelmed by emotion. "Amy, I don't know how to thank you enough. You've been my rock through all of this." Amy shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Morrison. Seeing Matthew awake and seeing you with him is all the thanks I need." Jack looked at her for a moment, an idea forming in his mind. "I want to do something," he said suddenly. "Something to thank the hospital. To help other children like Matthew. Do you think you could help me with that?" Amy looked at him surprised, but with a spark of interest in her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. What do you have in mind?" "I don't know exactly," Jack admitted. "But I want to use my resources to make a difference, to ensure that other parents and children have the same opportunity Matthew had." Amy smiled, feeling that she was witnessing the birth of something important. "I'll be happy to help in any way I can," she said. As Matthew slept peacefully, Jack and Amy began to discuss ideas, the seed of a project that would change not only their lives, but those of many others. Matthew's awakening had marked not only the beginning of his recovery, but also the start of a new mission for Jack Morrison, a mission of gratitude and hope. In the weeks following Matthew's awakening, Jack Morrison's life took a radical turn. The powerful businessman, previously known for his relentless pursuit of success and wealth, now spent most of his time at the hospital, divided between caring for his recovering son and working on his new project with Amy. One afternoon, while Matthew slept peacefully, Jack and Amy found themselves in a small conference room at the hospital, surrounded by papers and diagrams. "So," Jack said, running a hand through his disheveled hair, "how do you think a foundation would be the best way to do it?" Amy nodded, pointing to some of the documents in front of them. "A foundation would allow us to channel resources more efficiently. We could fund research, improve equipment, even provide support to families who can't afford costly treatments." Jack looked at her with admiration. In recent weeks, he had discovered that Amy was not only a dedicated nurse, but also a brilliant strategist when it came to healthcare. "It's incredible," he murmured. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this." Amy smiled. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Jack nodded, thoughtful. "You know, a month ago, my biggest concern was closing a multi-million-dollar deal. Now I just want to make sure no parent has to go through what I went through, what you went through." Amy's face softened at the mention of her own loss. "It's a noble cause, Jack," she said, using his first name without realizing it. "Alex would be proud." Jack noticed the slip but didn't mention it. Instead, he found himself enjoying the camaraderie that had developed between them. "You're the real inspiration here, Amy. Your strength, your dedication, it's admirable." For a moment, their gazes met, and something indescribable passed between them. It was Amy who broke eye contact first, clearing her throat. We should get back to work," she said, a slight blush on her cheeks. "There's a lot to do." Jack nodded, trying to ignore the sudden rapid beating of his heart. "You're right. Where do we start?" As they immersed themselves back into the details of their project, neither of them noticed the figure observing them from the half-open door. Dr. Hayes, who had come looking for Amy for a consultation, walked away silently, a small smile on his face. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Jack divided his time between meetings with his legal team to establish the foundation, visits to Matthew, who was improving day by day, and long planning sessions with Amy. One afternoon, while discussing possible names for the foundation, Matthew interrupted them with an innocent question. "Dad, is Amy your girlfriend?" Jack almost choked on the coffee he was drinking, while Amy froze in place, eyes wide open. "No." "Honey," Jack responded, coughing slightly, she's a very special friend who has helped us a lot." Matthew looked at them curiously. "But you spend a lot of time with her, and you smile a lot when you're together," Amy intervened, her voice slightly shaky. "Matthew, your dad and I are working on a very important project to help other children like you." "Oh," said Matthew, seeming to process the information. Then, with the brutal honesty of a child, he added, "Well, I think you'd make a nice couple." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack and Amy looked at each other, both blushing and not knowing what to say. It was Amy who finally broke the awkward moment. I think I should go check on some reports," she said hastily, gathering her things. "I'll see you tomorrow." After Amy left, Jack sat next to Matthew's bed, his mind spinning. "Son," he said softly, "Amy is a very important friend to us. But things are complicated." Matthew looked at him with wisdom beyond his years. "Why do adults always say things are complicated?" Jack couldn't help but laugh. "You're right. Sometimes we make things harder than they should be." That night, as Jack drove back home, something he rarely did now that he spent most nights at the hospital, he couldn't help but think about Matthew's words. Was he developing feelings for Amy? And if so, what did that mean for their professional relationship, for the foundation project? Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Amy found herself in front of a photo of Alex, her heart in conflict. "What am I doing?" she murmured to herself. "I can't. I shouldn't." But even as she uttered those words, she knew something had changed. The seed of a deeper feeling had been planted, and only time would tell if it would blossom or wither under the weight of her fears and reservations. What neither of them knew was that the seeds of change they had planted, both in their personal lives and in their joint project, would soon face a storm that would test their strength and determination, a storm that would threaten to destroy everything they had built. But that could also be the key to a future that neither of them dared to imagine. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Jack's temporary office at the hospital when his phone rang with a call from his assistant, Lucy. "Mr. Morrison," Lucy's voice sounded tense, "we have a problem. The board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. They're questioning your prolonged absence and recent financial decisions." Jack felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had been so focused on Matthew and the foundation project that he had almost completely neglected his business responsibilities. "I understand, Lucy," he responded, rubbing his temples. "I'll be there in an hour." He hung up the phone and quickly headed to Matthew's room. His son was awake, coloring in a book that Amy had brought him. "Hey, champ," Jack said, forcing a smile. "Dad has to go to the office for a while. Will you be okay?" Matthew nodded, although Jack noticed a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "Will you be back soon?" "I'll try," Jack promised, kissing his son's forehead. "Be a good boy for the nurses, okay?" As he headed towards the exit, he ran into Amy in the hallway. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his worried expression. "Trouble at the office," Jack replied briefly. "I have to go put out some fires." Amy nodded understandingly. "Go. I'll take care of Matthew." Jack gave her a grateful smile before rushing out of the hospital. The board meeting was as tense as Jack had feared. The shareholders were concerned about the company's falling stock prices and questioned Jack's decision to divert a significant amount of funds towards the new foundation. "We understand your personal situation, Mr. Morrison," said one of the board members. But you have responsibilities to this company and its shareholders. Jack stood up, his face a mask of determination. Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but I assure you that this foundation is not only morally right, but will benefit the company in the long term. Think about the reputation, the corporate social responsibility. There were murmurs of disagreement in the room. Another board member, an older man named Ernest Valdez, stood up. Jack, he said, his voice laden with condescension, you've always been a visionary in business, but I'm afraid this time your emotions are clouding your judgment. I propose a vote to temporarily relieve Mr. Morrison of his duties as CEO until this situation is resolved. Shock rippled through the room. Jack felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. You can't do this, he said, his voice tense. I built this company from the ground up, and that's why we want to protect it, Ernest responded. Even from you, if necessary. The vote was quick and brutal. By a narrow margin, the board decided to suspend Jack from his duties as CEO for a period of 3 months. Stunned, Jack left the boardroom. His assistant, Lucy, was waiting outside with a concerned expression. Mr. Morrison, what happened? Jack shook his head, unable to find the words. Prepare a press conference, he finally said. I need to get ahead of this before it leaks to the media. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Amy was having her own problems. Dr. Hayes had called her to his office. Amy, the doctor said, his tone serious. I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Mr. Morrison, outside of your professional responsibilities. Amy felt her pulse quicken. We're working on a project for the foundation, Doctor. It's for the benefit of the hospital. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. I understand, but I'm concerned that this might be affecting your professional judgment. Some staff members have expressed concerns about favoritism. Favoritism? Amy repeated, incredulous. Doctor, I assure you that my relationship with Mr. Morrison is strictly professional. It may be so, Dr. Hayes responded, but perceptions are important in our work. I suggest you take a step back and focus on your primary responsibilities. Amy left the office feeling frustrated and confused. How could people misinterpret her dedication to the foundation project? When she returned to Matthew's room, she was surprised to see Jack there, his face grim as he spoke on the phone. Yes, I understand, he was saying. No, I won't comment at this time. The press conference will be in an hour. He hung up and looked at Amy. His eyes filled with a mixture of anger and defeat. They've suspended me, he said simply. What? Amy exclaimed, forgetting for a moment her own situation. How could they do that? Jack ran a hand through his hair. They think I'm neglecting the company for the foundation, and they're right in part, but they don't understand how important this is. Amy put a comforting hand on his arm, momentarily forgetting Dr. Hayes's warnings. I'm so sorry, Jack. What are you going to do? Fight, he responded, his determination returning. I'm not going to let them destroy everything we've worked for. The foundation is too important. At that moment, Matthew, who had been pretending to sleep, spoke up. Dad, are you in trouble because of me? Jack turned to his son, his expression immediately softening. No, champ, none of this is your fault. It's just complicated adult stuff. Amy observed the interaction, her heart constricting. She knew she had to tell Jack about her own situation, but how could she add more stress to what he was already going through? Jack, she began, hesitating. There's something I need to tell you. But before she could continue, the door burst open. Ernest Valdez entered, followed by 2 security guards. I'm sorry, Jack, Ernest said, although his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. Sir, but the board has decided that you must be escorted off all company properties, including this hospital. Jack stood up, furious. What? You can't do this. My son is here. Your son can stay, Ernest responded coldly. But you must leave, now. Amy watched in horror as the guards approached Jack. Matthew began to cry, calling for his father. At that moment, Amy made a decision. She stepped between Jack and the guards. You can't do this, she said, her voice shaking with anger. This is a hospital, not corporate property. Mr. Morrison has every right to be here with his son. Ernest looked at her with disdain. And who are you to interfere in company matters? "I'm the nurse in charge of this patient," Amy responded, drawing herself up to her full height. "And I can assure you that removing a sick child's father goes against all medical and ethical protocols." There was a moment of tense silence. Finally, Ernest backed down. "Fine," he growled. "He can stay, but this isn't over, Jack." After Ernest and the guards left, Jack turned to Amy, his eyes shining with gratitude and something more. "Thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to do that." Amy returned his gaze, aware of the electricity that seemed to spark between them. "Of course I had to," she responded. "We're in this together, remember?" As Jack hugged a still-crying Matthew, Amy realized she had just crossed a line. She was no longer just a nurse helping with a charity project. She had become an ally, a confidant, perhaps even something more. And as she watched father and son embracing, she knew there was no going back. Whatever the future held for them, they would face the storms together. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. The news of Jack Morrison's suspension as CEO of his own company spread like wildfire, generating sensational headlines and wild speculation in the media. Jackie, for his part, refused to sit idly by. He spent his days divided between the hospital, caring for Matthew, and frantic meetings with lawyers and allies in the business world. He dedicated his nights to working tirelessly on the foundation project with Amy. One afternoon, while reviewing the latest details of the plan for the foundation in the hospital cafeteria, Amy noticed how exhausted Jack looked. "You should rest a bit," she said softly, putting a hand over his. "You won't do Matthew any good if you get sick too." Jack looked up from the papers, a small smile forming on his lips. "Are you worried about me, Amy?" Amy quickly withdrew her hand, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I worry about all my patients and their families," she responded, trying to maintain a professional tone. Jack looked at her for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, but was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. "Excuse me," said a voice. Both turned to see Dr. Hayes standing next to their table. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Amy felt a knot forming in her stomach. Had Dr. Hayes come to reprimand her again for her closeness to Jack? To her surprise, the doctor's face showed more concern than disapproval. "I've been following the news," Dr. Hayes began, sitting down with them. "And I've been thinking a lot about this foundation project you've been talking about." Jack and Amy exchanged a look of surprise. "Doctor," Amy said cautiously, "I know you expressed some concerns before about my involvement in this project." Dr. Hayes raised a hand to stop her. "Yes, and those concerns haven't completely disappeared. But after seeing how you've handled this crisis, I've realized that maybe I judged your intentions too hastily." He turned to Jack. "Mr. Morrison, what you're trying to do here, despite the personal and professional obstacles, is admirable. And Amy," he continued, looking at her, "your dedication to this project, in addition to your regular responsibilities, is impressive." Amy felt a lump forming in her throat. Dr. Hayes's recognition meant more than she could express. "Thank you, Doctor," Jack said, his voice laden with emotion. But why are you telling us all this now, Doctor?" Hayes leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Because I think I can help. I have contacts on the hospital's board of directors and in other medical institutions in the city. If you're willing to allow me to join your cause, I believe we can make this foundation a reality, despite the corporate obstacles you're facing." Jack and Amy looked at each other, a spark of hope igniting in their eyes. "Dr. Hayes," Jack said, extending his hand, "we would be honored to have you on board." As they shook hands, Amy felt something change in the air. What had begun as a project born of gratitude and personal tragedy was evolving into something bigger, something that could change not only their lives, but those of countless families and children. However, even as they celebrated this new alliance, none of them could foresee the trials that still awaited them. In the shadows, Ernest Valdez and his allies on the board of directors of Jack's company were plotting their next move, one that would threaten not only the foundation, but everything Jack had built. And in the midst of all this, the feelings between Jack and Amy continued to grow, a silent but undeniable attraction that would soon force them to face truths that both had been avoiding. Meanwhile, In the hospital room, Matthew watched the news on television, listening to the stories about his father with a mixture of confusion and concern. The child, more perceptive than the adults around him realized, was beginning to feel the weight of being the unwitting catalyst for all these changes. As night fell over the hospital, a sense of calm before the storm settled in. Jack, Amy, and Dr. Hayes had taken the first step towards a powerful alliance, but the forces opposing them were far from giving up. The stage was set for a battle that would test not only their resources and determination, but also the bonds they had formed between them. And at the heart of it all was Matthew, a child whose fight for life had triggered a series of events that no one could have foreseen. Dawn found Jack Morrison sitting next to Matthew's bed, watching his son's peaceful, sleeping face. The last few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, and in moments like this, in the silence of the early morning, Jack allowed himself to feel the weight of everything that was at stake. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Amy entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said quietly, offering him one of the cups. Jack accepted it with a grateful smile. "You're an angel," he murmured. They stood in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee and watching Matthew. It was Amy who finally broke the silence. "Jack," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." Jack looked at her, noticing the seriousness on her face. "What's wrong?" Amy took a deep breath. "Dr. Hayes, before he decided to support us, he warned me about our closeness. Some staff members have expressed concerns about favoritism." Jack frowned. "That's ridiculous. You're the most dedicated and professional nurse I've ever met." "Thank you," said Amy, smiling slightly. "But that's not all. Jack, I think we need to talk about what's happening between us." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what Amy was referring to, but he had been avoiding confronting it, fearing it might further complicate their already chaotic situation. "Amy, he began, but was interrupted by a soft moan from Matthew, who was beginning to wake up. They both turned to the child, the conversation momentarily forgotten. Matthew slowly opened his eyes, smiling when he saw his father and Amy. "Good morning, champ," Jack said, leaning in to kiss his son's forehead. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Matthew replied, his voice still hoarse from sleep. Then, looking at Amy, he added, "Will you stay with us today, Amy?" Amy felt a lump form in her throat. "I have to work." "Sweetie, but I'll come see you when I can." Matthew nodded, but there was a glimmer of disappointment in his eyes that didn't go unnoticed by either adult. Just then, Dr. Hayes entered the room, his face serious. "Good morning," he said. "Jack, can I talk to you for a moment in private?" Jack exchanged a worried look with Amy before following Dr. Hayes out of the room. Amy stayed with Matthew, trying to maintain a calm expression, while her mind raced, wondering what news the doctor would bring. In the hallway, Dr. Hayes spoke in a low but urgent voice. "Jack, I just got a call from one of my contacts on the hospital's board of directors. It seems Ernest Valdez has been pushing for the hospital to distance itself from your foundation project." Jack felt anger bubbling up inside him. "How dare he? This has nothing to do with the company." "Doctor," Hayes nodded understandingly. "I know, but Ernest is playing dirty. He's insinuated that your emotional instability could put the hospital's reputation at risk." Jack clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. "What can we do?" "For now, stay calm," Dr. Hayes replied. "I'm working on countering these accusations, but we need to be careful. Any misstep could be used against us." Jack nodded, grateful for the doctor's support. When they re-entered the room, Amy looked at them questioningly, but Jack simply shook his head, indicating they would talk later. The rest of the morning passed in silent tension. Amy came and went, attending to her duties, but always finding excuses to return to Matthew's room. Jack alternated between playing with his son and immersing himself in his phone, desperately trying to manage the crisis from a distance. It was near noon when things came to a head. Jack was in the middle of a heated phone conversation with his lawyer when Matthew began to complain of pain. Amy entered just in time to see the child double over, his face contorted in a grimace of agony. "Matthew," Jack exclaimed, dropping the phone and rushing to the bed. Amy was already in action, checking Matthew's vital signs and calling for Dr. Hayes. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity as the medical team worked to stabilize the child. When the crisis finally passed and Matthew fell back asleep, exhausted, Jack collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Amy, exhausted but relieved, approached him. "Jack," she said softly, putting a hand on his shoulder. "He's okay now. Matthew is strong." Jack looked up, his eyes meeting Amy's. At that moment, all the barriers they had maintained between them seemed to crumble. "Amy," he whispered, his voice broken with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You've been my rock through all of this." Amy felt her heart racing. She knew they were on the edge of something, an emotional precipice from which there would be no return once they crossed it. "Jack, But before she could continue, Matthew's sleepy voice interrupted them. "Dad, what's going on?" They both turned to the bed, where Matthew was looking at them with sleepy but concerned eyes. "Nothing, champ," Jack said, forcing a smile and moving closer to his son. "Everything's fine. Go back to sleep." But Matthew, with the insight that only children possess, wasn't fooled. "I heard angry voices. Does someone want to take me away from you, Dad?" Jack felt his heart breaking. He sat on the bed, hugging his son tightly. "No one is going to take you anywhere, Matthew. I promise. Dad won't allow it." Amy watched the scene, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. At that moment, she made a decision that she knew could cost her her career, but that her heart told her was right. "Jack," she said, her voice firm despite the emotion, "I think I know how we can fight this." Jack looked at her, a spark of hope lighting up in his eyes. "How?" "I'm going to testify," Amy said. "As Matthew's head nurse, my testimony about your dedication as a father will carry weight. And," she paused, taking a deep breath, "I'm going to reveal about the foundation, how you've been working tirelessly to help other children like Matthew, even at the cost of your own career." Jack looked at her, amazed. "Amy, I can't ask you to do that. You could lose your job." Amy smiled sadly. "Some things are more important than a job, Jack. You taught me that." At that moment, with Matthew between them and the weight of the decisions they faced on their shoulders, Jack and Amy looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Without words, they both knew that what they felt for each other went beyond gratitude or friendship. Just when it seemed the moment would lead them to cross that final line, the door opened and Dr. Hayes entered, his face grave. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, noticing the tension in the room. "But we need to talk. The hospital's lawyers are here, and things are getting complicated." Jack and Amy separated, the reality of their situation falling heavily on them once again. But as Jack got up to follow Dr. Hayes, he felt Amy's hand in his, squeezing it gently in support. "I'll be here," she said simply. Jack nodded, grateful, before turning to Matthew. "I'll be back soon, champ. Get some rest, okay?" As Jack left the room with Dr. Hayes, Amy stayed with Matthew, her mind spinning with the implications of what she was about to do. She knew that by testifying in Jack's favor, she was not only risking her career but also exposing her own feelings to public scrutiny. But as she looked at Matthew, who had finally fallen back asleep, she knew she had no other choice. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost, and this, Amy decided, was one she was willing to risk everything for. Outside, in the hospital hallway, Jack was facing his own demons. As he followed Dr. Hayes towards what he knew would be another round of legal and corporate conflicts, one thing became clear in his mind. Whatever happened, he would fight with everything he had. For Matthew, for the foundation, and for the future he barely dared to imagine with Amy. Dr. Hayes led him to a conference room where several men in suits were waiting. Jack recognized some as hospital lawyers, others seemed to be representatives from his own company. "Mr. Morrison Dietz," one of the hospital lawyers began, "we understand you're in a difficult situation, but we must consider the legal and ethical implications of your current situation." Jack sat down, his face a mask of determination. "I'm listening," he said simply. For the next hour, Jack listened as the lawyers detailed the hospital's concerns about his continued presence, Ernest Valdez's accusations, and the possible legal repercussions of the custody battle that was looming. Finally, when everyone had finished speaking, Jack slowly stood up. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I appreciate your concerns, but let me be clear. I'm not going to abandon my son. I'm not going to give up on the foundation that could help so many children like Matthew. And I certainly won't allow Ernest Valdez or anyone else to intimidate me into abandoning what's right." There was a moment of silence in the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, Dr. Hayes spoke up. "I agree with Mr. Morrison," he said. "I've witnessed firsthand his dedication as a father and the importance of the foundation he's trying to create. I believe it would be a grave mistake for this hospital to distance itself from a project that could benefit so many." The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Meanwhile, back in Matthew's room, Amy was struggling with her own dilemmas. She knew her decision to testify in Jack's favor could cost her her career, but every time she looked at Matthew, she knew she was doing the right thing. It was at that moment that Matthew woke up again. "Amy," he said softly, "are you in love with my dad?" The question took Amy completely by surprise. Matthew, it's complicated," she responded, struggling to find the right words. Matthew looked at her with wisdom beyond his years. "Adults always say things are complicated," he said, "but love shouldn't be, right? You make Dad happy, and he makes you happy. I can see it." Amy felt tears welling up in her eyes. "You're a very smart boy, Matthew," she said softly, "and you're right. Your dad does make me very happy." "Then you should tell him," Matthew said with the simplicity of a child. "Life is short. That's what Grandma always says." Amy couldn't help but laugh through her tears. "Your grandma sounds like a very wise woman," she said. Just at that moment, the door opened and Jack entered, his face showing signs of exhaustion, but also determination. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Dad," Matthew said immediately, "Amy has something to tell you." Jack looked at Amy, confused. "What's going on?" Amy felt her heart pounding. This wasn't the moment she had imagined, but maybe Matthew was right. Maybe life was too short to complicate things. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling slightly, But before she could finish, the door burst open. Ernest Valdez entered, followed by two police officers. "Sorry to interrupt," Ernest said, his voice loaded with false sympathy, "but I have a court order. Jack Morrison, you are temporarily relieved of Matthew's custody, pending an investigation into your fitness as a father." Chaos erupted in the room. Matthew began to cry, clinging to Jack. Amy stepped between the bed and the officers, her face a mask of determination. "You can't do this," Jack said, his voice broken with emotion. "He's my son. He needs to be with me." Ernest smiled coldly. "I'm sorry, Jack, but it's for Matthew's own good. Don't worry, he'll be in good hands." As the officers advanced, Amy made a split-second decision. She turned to Jack and, in front of everyone, kissed him passionately. When they separated, she looked directly into Ernest's eyes. "I'm going to testify," she said firmly, "about the kind of father Jack is, about the foundation, about everything. And I suggest, Mr. Valdez, that you prepare yourself for a legal battle that will make your actions today seem like child's play." Ernest's face paled slightly. Clearly, he hadn't expected this resistance. At that moment, as if fate had decided to intervene, Dr. Hayes entered the room, followed by several members of the hospital's board of directors. "I think we all need to have a conversation," Dr. Hayes said with authority. "Officers, I ask you to wait outside. No one is taking anyone away until we've cleared up a few things." As the chaos in the room began to settle, Jack looked at Amy, his eyes full of gratitude and something deeper. He knew that, whatever happened next, he was no longer alone in this fight. Matthew, from his bed, watched everything with big, scared eyes, but also with a glimmer of hope. Maybe, he thought, complicated things could be simplified after all. Maybe love, in all its forms, was stronger than any court order or corporate threat, And so, with the future hanging by a thread, the hospital room became the stage for a battle that would determine not only Matthew's fate, but that of everyone involved. A battle for love, justice, and the power of compassion in the face of greed and manipulation. The tension in the hospital room was palpable. Jack Morrison stood by Matthew's bed, one hand protectively on his son's shoulder, the other firmly entwined with Amy's. Facing them, Ernest Valdez and the police officers waited, while Dr. Hayes and the hospital board members observed the scene with grave expressions. "All right," Dr. Hayes began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I think we all need to take a moment to consider what's really important here. We're in a hospital, and our primary concern must be Matthew's well-being." Ernest stepped forward, his face a mask of false concern. "Precisely, Doctor. And it's for Matthew's well-being that we're here. Clearly, Jack is not in a condition to adequately care for his son at this time." Jack felt anger burning inside him, but before he could respond, Amy spoke. "With all due respect, Mr. Valdez," she said, her voice firm, "as Matthew's primary nurse, I can attest that Mr. Morrison has been an exemplary father throughout his son's stay here. He has been present, attentive, and completely dedicated to Matthew's well-being." One of the board members, an older woman with glasses, cleared her throat. "Nurse Sanders, we understand your position, but we've also heard rumors about a personal relationship between you and Mr. Morrison. Can you assure us that your judgment isn't compromised?" Amy felt herself blushing, but held her head high. "My personal relationship with Mr. Morrison has nothing to do with my professional assessment of his capabilities as a father. In fact, it's precisely because I've witnessed his dedication and love for Matthew that I can speak with such conviction." Jack looked at Amy with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. At that moment, he knew that no matter what happened, they would fight together. "If I may," Dr. Hayes intervened, "I believe there's another aspect we should consider. Mr. Morrison has been working on a foundation project that could greatly benefit our hospital and many children like Matthew. Do we really want to risk losing that opportunity?" Ernest let out a scornful laugh. "A foundation? Please. It's just Jack's desperate attempt to clean up his image." It was then that Matthew, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "That's not true," he said, his voice small but firm. "My dad wants to help other kids. He told me. He wants no other child to have to go through what I went through." All eyes turned to the child. Jack felt a lump forming in his throat. "Matthew is right," he said softly. "All of this, the foundation, the changes in my life, it's because I finally understood what really matters. It's not money, it's not power, it's making a difference in others' lives." There was a moment of silence in the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, one of the hospital board members, an older man with an impressive moustache, cleared his throat. I think we should hear more about this foundation," he said. "If it really can benefit our hospital and the children we care for, it would be irresponsible of us not to consider it." Ernest looked furious. "This is ridiculous. We have a court order." "An order that was based on incomplete information," Amy interjected. "I'm willing to testify under oath about everything I've witnessed here. About Jack's love for Matthew, about his dedication to the foundation, about everything." The police officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Clearly, they hadn't expected this resistance. Dr. Hayes stepped forward. "I propose the following. Let's postpone any legal action for 48 hours. During that time, Mr. Morrison and Nurse Sanders will present their proposal for the foundation to the hospital board. We'll also gather testimonies from the medical staff about Mr. Morrison's behavior during Matthew's stay. After that, we'll make an informed decision on how to proceed." There was a murmur of agreement among the board members. Even the police officers seemed relieved by this temporary solution. Ernest, seeing that he was losing ground, attempted one last blow. "Jack, think about what you're doing. You're risking everything you've worked for." Jack looked at his former colleague and for the first time felt sorry for him. "You're wrong, Ernest. I'm not risking everything. I'm discovering what really matters." With those words, the atmosphere in the room changed. The police officers, after receiving a nod from Dr. Hayes, withdrew. The board members began to discuss quietly among themselves. Ernest Khan, defeated for the moment, left the room without saying another word. Jack turned to Amy and Matthew, embracing them both. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice laden with emotion. "Both of you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Amy returned the embrace, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We're in this together," she said softly. "All of us." Matthew, from the middle of the hug, smiled. "See, Dad, I told you Amy loved you." Jack and Amy looked at each other, surprised by the child's frankness, but unable to deny the truth in his words. Dr. Hayes, observing the scene, couldn't help a small smile. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. "We have a lot of work to do in the next 48 hours. I suggest we all get some rest and prepare for tomorrow." As the doctor and the remaining board members left the room, Jack, Amy, and Matthew stayed together, a small island of calm in the sea of chaos surrounding them. They knew the challenges they faced were far from over, but for the first time in a long time, they felt a spark of true hope. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, bathing the hospital room in a warm golden glow. It was as if the universe itself was signaling that, after darkness, light always comes. And for Jack, Amy, and Matthew, that light was shining brighter than ever. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic activity. Jack and Amy worked tirelessly, preparing their presentation for the hospital board. They spent sleepless nights, refining every detail of the plan for the foundation, ensuring that every aspect was backed by solid data and realistic projections. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes coordinated the collection of testimonies from the hospital staff. Nurses, doctors, and even cleaning staff came forward voluntarily to share their experiences with Jack and Matthew. Stories of paternal dedication, of nights spent by the hospital bed, of moments of laughter and comfort in the midst of adversity, quickly accumulated. The morning of the presentation arrived with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Jack, dressed in a suit but without a tie, a subtle but significant change from his former corporate image, was standing in front of the conference room window, watching the sunrise. Amy entered, carrying a stack of folders. "Ready?" she asked softly. Jack turned to her, a small smile on his lips. "As ready as I can be. Amy, whatever happens today, I want you to know." She interrupted him with a soft kiss on the cheek. "I know," she said simply. "Me too." The door opened, and the board members began to enter. Jack noticed with a mixture of relief and apprehension that Ernest Valdez was not among them. Dr. Hayes was the last to enter, accompanied by a surprise, Matthew in a wheelchair with a nurse by his side. "I hope you don't mind," Dr. Hayes said. Matthew insisted on being present. "I think he has every right to be part of this." Jack felt a lump forming in his throat as his son bravely smiled at him. The presentation began. Jack and Amy took turns, detailing their vision for the foundation. They talked about research programs, improvements in medical equipment, support for families who couldn't afford costly treatments. But more than numbers and projections, they talked about hope, about the possibility of a future where no parent would have to feel the desperation Jack had experienced, where no child would have to suffer without the best possible care. When they finished, there was a moment of silence in the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, Matthew raised his hand. "Can I say something?" he asked shyly. The board chairman nodded, moved. Matthew looked at his father and then at Amy before speaking. "I know I'm just a kid," he began, "but I've seen things that many adults haven't seen. I've seen what it's like to be scared, really scared, but I've also seen what true love is. My dad, he changed. For me, for other kids like me, and Amy. She helped us see that we could do something good with all this. I don't understand everything about foundations and boards, but I know that if they can help other kids not be so scared, then it's a good thing. Please, let them do it." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Matthew finished. The board chairman cleared his throat, visibly moved. "I think I speak for everyone when I say we're deeply impressed. Mr. Morrison, Nurse Sanders, your proposal is extraordinary. We'll need time to discuss the details, but I can say with confidence that you have our full support." The wave of relief and joy that swept through the room was palpable. Jack hugged Matthew, tears flowing freely down his face. Amy joined the embrace, and for a moment, the outside world ceased to exist. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The foundation was officially established, with Jack and Amy as co-directors. Ernest Valdez, facing an investigation for his actions, quietly resigned from the board of Jack's company. Matthew continued to improve, and soon he was discharged from the hospital. The day he could finally go home, all the ICU staff gathered to say goodbye, many with tears in their eyes. Months later, at the grand opening of the Foundation's first project, a pediatric research center, Jack found himself in front of a podium again. But this time, instead of talking about profits and acquisitions, he spoke of hope and second chances. "A year ago," he said, his voice laden with emotion, "I thought I had lost everything. But in reality, I was about to find everything." He looked at Amy, who was standing beside him, and at Matthew, healthy and smiling in the front row. "I learned that true success isn't measured in dollars or stocks, but in the lives we touch, in the difference we make. This foundation is a testament to that. It's a testament to the power of love, of compassion, and yes, of forgiveness." As the crowd applauded, Jack stepped down from the podium and embraced his family. Amy, now his fiancée, gave him a soft kiss. Matthew, growing stronger every day, hugged them both. At that moment, surrounded by love and purpose, Jack Morrison knew he had found his true legacy, not in the skyscrapers he had built or the fortunes he had amassed, but in the hearts he had touched and the lives he had changed. And as the sun set over the city, bathing everything in a warm golden glow, Jack, Amy, and Matthew walked together towards their future, ready to face any challenge that might come. Because now they knew that, with love and determination, anything was possible.